What is up, everybody? It is the Cash Show. We're talking NFL Week 3 cash games. Week 2 wasn't too bad for me. Cash games are always a good time to talk about here, and it's a loaded slate, 13 games to discuss, so we'll have to see. There'll be tons of different values to talk about. Typically on these slates, I like when there's a lot of value, so it's not like everyone's just playing the same thing. So last week, it kind of felt that way. We'll see what this week shakes up as. Again, there's a lot of really good games that we'll talk about, but we'll bring in Bryce. How's it going over there?
I'm good. Off in a foreign country for the first time in forever during NFL season. Honestly, don't hate it. You just can't reg games from here, so I kind of pre-regged everything. Just leads some more action on DraftKings and FanDuel for me personally. Not out of choice, but that's just the way things work out sometimes. So yeah, I'll be a little more DraftKings focused here. I'll make sure to throw in some FanDuel nuggets in there as well. I think it's a super interesting slate on both sides. As you said, 13 games is about the biggest slate you'll ever see.
Yeah, it's not just like 13 games too. There's good games for sure. Like Texans Vikings is one. Then I'd say the 1 o'clock window is a little boring, right? Sure, there's plays, but it's more of the boring window. You do have Saints and Eagles, which in that 1 o'clock window. In the 4 o'clock window, I mean, it's a nice 5 gamer, honestly. If you want to play 5 game, 4 p.m. slate and play some cash games, you certainly could. You got Rams, Niners, which will obviously be a loaded game, Lions and Cardinals, and then Cowboys and Ravens. So those are like 5 games that we'll definitely be talking a lot about those plays, I would say. Of course, we'll have values open up and stuff like that. But yeah, we're going to break it down. We'll talk about this slate. We'll go position by position. If you guys could please hit that like for us and subscribe to the channel. Check out all the content we got. We got the Print Factory going on right now, so you guys can check that out after. Bryce just did the college football show, and we got tons of stuff for you guys today. Let's dive in, though. Let's talk about quarterback, Bryce. And I mean, quarterback, I talked about all those like games that we're going to want to consider, guys. So, of course, we're going to want to consider the quarterbacks. You got Kyler Murray, who's a running quarterback that's got to be in play. You could make a case for, Goff if you wanted as a safe option. You could make the cases for Dak and Lamar. I bet more on FanDuel for someone like Lamar with his rushing upside that he can have. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, we know he's got to be in play. Are people crazy enough to play Derek Carr now because the Saints offense can't miss? I don't know. I doubt they're playing him in cash games, but it's week 3, and by the end of week 2, people think they know everything, and whatever they've seen, they just play. So who knows what you're going to see this week? But again, lots of really good games. The quarterback I think I like the most right now is Kyler Murray. I just think that's the game of the slate. I feel like he had a good passing quarterback and a really good funnel matchup. He also can run the ball. It just overall works out really well for him. I just think that he's someone I was high on going into this season. So I think he's going to be my guy. Curious your thoughts.
Well, credit to you. Like Kyler was the play of the slate last week. With all the points scored last week, the quarterback scores were absurdly low across the board. Like,
Yeah.
If you had Kyler, you pretty much won your cash games just because not a lot of people played him. Everyone played Mahomes or Daniels, and they both put up 2 pretty shitty scores. So, I mean, Mahomes just – KC offense looks a little fucking beat to me. It just doesn't seem as explosive as they have in years past. And, that kind of checks out.
They are without Pacheco now, so I'm curious your thoughts on this. Is obviously we're not talking about Mahomes, but like he might be forced to pass a little bit more like that. And I think it could change a bit.
Well, I mean, we get Mahomes on FanDuel, so like he's definitely in the discussion. So more of a FanDuel thing. It's like it's kind of hard for me to play him over Hurts. Like if he was cheaper, I would like it more. He just doesn't have like the tush push upside that Hurts has. So granted, that could change. Like they could just turn into like, oh, I'm just going to throw a 1-yard pass on the goal line type of deal, like without Pacheco. I think it's a pretty interesting spot for Casey's passing offense, actually. I would prefer to get to Rashee Rice if you really wanted a piece of the Chiefs offense here. I think he could be like an extension of the run game more than anything else. Like, you've seen Travis Kelce do that in years past when they've been without a good running back. And I kind of think that's Rice's role now. So that's kind of my take on the Casey passing offense. But we can get back to the meat of the slate here. I think Hurts is the best quarterback on the slate, like straight up. Running quarterbacks in a dome, I always like. no AJ Brown. I think hurts his upside a bit, but you know, even with Barkley's complete lapse at the end of the game, dropping that pass last week, I do think his passing upside is still there, like to running backs and whatnot. So I like him, Devonta Smith, a lot. You mentioned Kyler. I mean, if you had Kyler last week, I mean, you didn't even need to have Marv with him in cash games. You pretty much won the slate, unless you like really messed up the rest of your team. Like them, I don't love the mid-tier quarterbacks quite as much. I would kind of like consider like Kyler in like the higher pricing tier this week, with his price at 6,900. Like it's kind of like high sixes I consider expensive. So like Kyler or Hurts is kind of tough for me. If you're going cheaper, I think people are going to play Watson. I don't necessarily love that. I think it's just kind of pick on the Giants, but I've watched Deshaun Watson for a couple of years now, and the guy's absolute ass. I don't really want anything to do with him personally. I would rather go to like a Geno Smith. I know he doesn't have the supposed rushing upside that Watson has, but Seattle's offense is super interesting to me this year. They're much more of a pass first, explosive offense. You saw it last week against New England. They're willing to sling it all across the field. To Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and Jigba has really like taken a step forward this year, which I think helps Geno a ton. So he would be my favorite cheap quarterback. You can definitely see, I definitely see some people on Derek Carr under 6K. I personally can't get there. If Carr beats me, he beats me. Eventually, this Saints offense is going to regress a bit. Eventually, and I'm not sure this is the week that it happens, but like Taysom Hill is going to vulture some of these touchdowns he's been getting. I would just rather have Geno than Carr, straight up personally. So that kind of takes him out of the discussion for me. But I mean, if you're buying into this revamped Saints offense, and I don't think it's a bad idea to buy into, I just think there's better spots to do it, even on this slate. Like I'd rather have Kamara and pay for him than go to Carr. So that's kind of where I stand here. I actually don't think like Darnold's the worst play. He's been really good this year. I actually like him. I think this Minnesota-Houston game, outside of Akers, is going to go super overlooked personally.
Yeah, well, I'm not like scared of Houston's defense, right? So I do agree with you on that take if you want to go that way. I'm definitely leaning more, like I said, like probably spend up quarterback. It just kind of
you get plenty of value too. Yeah. It's like it's easier to spend this week at quarterback than most weeks.
Yes, that's the thing, and last week was like that too. It's like if you wanted to spend up, you could, or you could spend down. It's just we have not saying we have infinite value, but we have a ton of value to be able to do whatever you want. Like if you want to buy into the Saints offense and play Alvin Kamara, you can, right? Which obviously is definitely one of the running backs that we'll discuss here on this slate. So let's go over to the running back position. And we have value at the running back position already, right? I talked about this a little bit last week, how Kenneth Walker could be out and Charbonnet could be a thing. And of course, he was, and he's got to be a thing again, right? On FanDuel specifically, he's 6,700. Cam Akers on FanDuel, I want to call this out. He's 4K on FanDuel. Like, that's a really nice price for a starting running back. I don't care if it's Cam Akers or who it is. It could be it could be JBC back there running the ball at 4K. I think I'd be a little bit interested in it. So we also have Jordan Mason. Obviously, want to talk about him. He's just in a great role against the Rams. Also, George Kittle was not seen practicing. That just came out. Not saying I'm going to adjust everything because of that, but that's another piece of news to watch out for. That we'll talk about when we get to tight end, but that just shows that they can lean on Jordan Mason and Ayuk a little bit more this week. So a lot of good running back plays at the top, or in the mid-tier and top, and even values. Like Cam Akers is 4.7 down there if you want to go to him. You can go to Kyron Williams, who could have an expanded role at 7.1K. You could easily go back to an old reliable, a Saquon Barkley. You're just going to have salary to spend for kind of whatever you want to, it feels like. So if you want to get off the board with stuff, it feels like you can. In cash games, I don't like when it's obvious. I like when there's a bunch of different plays that you can kind of go to and pick and choose. We'll see what this week shakes up as. I think there's a lot of plays that you can get to. Bryce, is it super obvious and just a clear build to you? Because I think last week was. I think this week won't be completely clear, but there might be a path that people gravitate towards.
I think on FanDuel it's a little tougher. in terms of like which running backs to choose, just because like Jordan Mason's as expensive as Kamara and like Bijan Robinson. So it's like, are you going to take Mason straight up over those guys? Personally, I would take Kamara over Mason. Like if price like totally didn't matter on DraftKings, like there's 1,200 or 1,300 difference between them. On FanDuel, it's like 200 or 100. So I think that's like one of the sticking points on FanDuel this week. Cam Akers is just a plug and play for me, both sites. Too cheap. Stoneman FanDuel, as you mentioned, 47 on DraftKings. I'd probably play him up to like 6K on DraftKings. I'm just a huge believer in the Houston offense, and they've shown that, or so far at least, that Akers is like the direct backup to Mixon. And Mixon didn't have a great game last week; he got hurt. Look what Mixon did week 1. I don't think Mixon's like the most talented running back out there, neither is Akers, but this offense can produce 150 and 3 from the running back position pretty easily. So I think Akers is a super easy play this week. After him, per dollar, I think there's kind of like, we'll talk about DraftKings here real quick. I think Kamara and Achane are like the two top guys that I would want. And by top, I would define as like 7K and above. Like I think there's a pretty big pricing gap between like them and like the Jordan Mason type of guy. I would rank it Kamara then Achane. I think it's totally fine to play one of the two. On DraftKings, Mason's hard for me to get away from at 6'2". He doesn't have much pass catching ability, but as you highlighted, San Francisco is so thin that I think 100 and like 1.5 touchdowns is a pretty fair projection for him, and that definitely hits it at 6.2K. So I like Mason Akers, and then kind of like fill in the third. Achane, Kamara, I would rank them Kamara, Achane, and then Charbonnet. I haven't gotten to him yet, but I talked about Seattle's offense this week. Charbonnet ran pretty bad to not have like a better game last week, and he still had a pretty solid game. He's going to be a workhorse for them. They've shown no inkling of getting away from him when Walker's been out. So I think that's a really good play here. 6K on DraftKings and 67 on FanDuel. Like I would play Akers and Charbonnet on FanDuel, and I would play Akers and Mason on DraftKings. And then it's kind of, I think it's a 3 running back. Running back is so loaded, as we've alluded to. I think it's a 3 running back type of slate on both sites for me. So kind of pick who you like as the third. It's a little tough right now. And, with 13 games, there's 26 teams out there. We can easily get some news that makes like another, like one of these guys that we're not even talking about locks right now.
Yeah, 1,000%. And like one good point you brought up is like the Kamara versus Achane thing. Like that's going to be a decision that like people can debate. Like I might get a message from like a Discord member and they're like, oh, I'm debating between these two. Which do you like? And it's like, like this might be my lean, but like they're both good options, right? Like one of my big decisions last week was, I'm sure you had a similar decision. It was on FanDuel. I think it was Mahomes and Godwin versus Rashee Rice and Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
And I picked Godwin, and I remember was messaging me and they were like, "Oh, you're fading Rashee Rice," and I was like, "Yeah, but like I can only play 3 receivers, right? Like you can't play 5 running backs. I can't play 6 or 7. Like I can only play 3. So you're gonna just have to pick between really good options, and you're just gonna have to figure out what feels like the best route. And sometimes in these spots, maybe it's looking at late swap opportunities, right? That could be an important.
Yeah, I mean, I had to late swap last week. Like I went to Daniel's right side on your 2v2, and I was like, well, there's no way this team is dead. Because your quarterback, it was a crazy high scoring slate, and your quarterback got you 12. So it's like, even if the rest of the team did decently well, I thought I was pretty dead. So I ended up late swapping. I got into our guy Tank Dell, who I hate to say it, I don't hate this week, but he dropped like a 60-yard touchdown, which would have won me the slate. But it's like I got off Cooper Kupp, and I told everyone in Discord, like, if you need to get different at cash this week, just swap off Cooper Kupp. He's going to be 100% out.
Yeah.
And you'll probably have the same scenario this week. Like you're likely not to be dead after one, but if you are, like, get off for Brandon Ayuk. or like someone like that. Like it obviously you want to play him, and we'll get to receiver here in a second, but receiver is the most variable position. There's plenty of direct swap options. There's plenty of 2v2s you can play, and you're giving up a couple of points in projection, which at the end of the day is not great, but it doesn't like make you dead. And so utilize late swap more than you think you would need to. Like I wish I had late swap on DraftKings last week personally. I had Lazard who had an awful score, but the rest of my team did well, so I was like, I could be fine. And then like Mahomes Cup busted. Like those are the two guys I would have gotten off of. So I personally like to swap, and I know you and I talk about this a lot in Discord and on the show, but I like to swap more liberally than most people here.
Yeah, I think one issue you ran into, I'll say, is like Iosivas just went off. Like he got 2 touchdowns. Like I looked at that back,
Yeah.
and I think that was the problem. I think if he only gets 1 touchdown, you're still fine. I don't
He
know.
had what, 3 catches? 2
Yeah.
catches for
Yeah,
2 touchdowns? I was like, all right, dude, fuck off.
Yeah. It was
After he scored the first one, I was like, all right, this guy's not going to score another one. He caught a 1-yard fade. Oh, he does it again. I was like, great.
Yeah, I definitely think I'm with you because I considered swapping a little bit. Like I was talking about it and trying to figure out should I not? And I didn't even look into the swaps because I just came to the realization I'm not swapping when I looked more at it. And I don't know, looking back, I thought it wasn't, but it's definitely something to think about for sure, especially with, how the industry is right now, how like sharp it is. And also like, there's just like, there's a lot of good plays right now. Like to start this 2024 season, there's just good plays everywhere.
Well,
And like,
plus, as you said, it's 13 games. Like there's way more, we have 5 4 p.m. games. It's not like even last week we only had 3. Like this week you'll have way more swap opportunities than most weeks. And, it should be 5 games, 4 p.m. every week, but it's not. And that's the world we live in.
well, during bye weeks too, like for instance, like when we have like those 7 or 8 game slates and they start playing in London, like if your option is swapping off of Cooper Cup and you have to go down to like Elijah Moore, I'm not saying you will, right?
Yeah.
But like we have the shitty slates, like it's just like that's not something you're gonna do. Like it's so you have to really look at it all and understand, hey, this slate has good swapping equity. So it's something to think about. Let's move over to receiver. You talked about Brandon Ayuk. I will say the number 1 owned receiver on FanDuel this week looks like it is going to be Rashee Rice, who we've talked a little bit about. And so he'll be a good option over there. Chris Godwin has a great role playing in the slot. That was one thing I wanted to buy in on last week, and I'm okay with buying in on it a little bit again this week, but he's playing Denver. It's not the most amazing spot. You got Devonta Smith, who will obviously be an intriguing option because, hey, there's no A.J. Brown. It's in a really good game. Another guy I want to buy in on, probably won't buy in him on cash games, but I feel like in the future weeks I'm going to buy him is a Chris Olave. I doubt I'm buying him that much this week, but he's one of those guys I kind of have my eye on a little bit at the receiver position over the next couple weeks. You talked about JSN earlier. I mean, JSN looks like he's going to definitely have some ownership along with DK Metcalf going up against Miami. Malik Neighbor saw an insane amount of targets, might not be a great matchup. Tank Dell is 5,200. Justin Jefferson, honestly, I could see him having a huge game if you have the salary. The receiver position is absolutely loaded with tons of plays, Bryce. So where on earth are you starting at?
We'll start with FanDuel real quick here to get it out of the way. First off, I'm going to say Ayuk's a lock on both sides. I think it doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. So you're playing with two receivers. Like FanDuel, you have so many good plays in like the 6K and even low 7K range, like Rashee Rice, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, Chris Olave. I would even add like Michael Pittman in there. Devonta Smith and Neighbors are more DraftKings plays than FanDuel plays for me. I do like Devonta Smith a lot, but it's really tough to pay 8K for him. And, on FanDuel, you have all these guys in the mid-tier. I think it's just kind of like 3 mid-tier receivers with Ayuk, and you really can't make a bad decision there. DraftKings is a little more interesting here. I would like to get to Devonta Smith. He's like not a must play, but he's like one of my want plays. Only 6.9K, no AJ Brown. I'm not sure on Marcus Lattimore's status yet. Not sure if he's been practicing. I need to look a little more, but I would like him more if Lattimore is out. We saw CeeDee Lamb. He didn't have a great game, but that's because they got absolutely demolished last week. But he made their secondary look silly on his touchdown. I think Devonta Smith's like an absolute alpha without AJ Brown. So I like him. I think Godwin's in play on DraftKings, only 6.5K. Neighbors 6.4K. I know we like him. We played him week 1. I didn't play him last week. I was kicking myself. I don't think Cleveland's the spot to do it. It's just a really tough matchup for him. I brought up Tank Dell in my swap mainly because I wanted to talk about him here. They kind of used him as a running back last week. I don't know if you watched the Sunday night game much, but that was super weird. Like with all the Jets,
I didn't notice it. How often was it?
They didn't line him up at running back, but they put him in like motion, like every single play, and like they handed it to him. It wasn't super successful. I think that's a good way to get PPR targets eventually. Like I think those handoffs will turn into like quick passes eventually.
Keep in mind, so I pulled it up. I think this is a good point by you. He had 2 rushes against the Colts and 3 against the Bears. And in a week where they have Cam Akers as their running back, right? And like Dare Agumawale, like that 2 or 3 could turn into 5 or 6 very easily, especially.
And they haven't really thrown to him on that jet sweep handoff yet. Like a lot of times it's like, oh, put him in motion and then play action with like him being like the quick pass option out to the side. You haven't seen that a lot, and that's an easy way to rack up PPR points. So I'm not saying he does that this week. I don't know their game plan, but I do think that's in the cards for the future. And I don't love him just because he's like still the 3rd receiver on this team. Like, I mean, Nico Collins is clearly the alpha, and I think Diggs is playing a lot more in the 2 receiver sets that they run.
Yeah,
in the 2 receiver sets.
Yeah, you're good. Another thing too you could see is you can see them run that at the goal line, because when they could have a bunch formation and then they bring him across and they easily dump it to him and he scores an easy like 2-yard touchdown because it's hard for the quarterback to keep up running through the whole bunch formation at the goal line and everything. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point, especially on this week, and the price is good at 5,200. So again, there's so many receivers to play this week. Just really think about that. And the guys you can easily late swap off of if you feel like you're behind are probably Ayuk and Rashee Rice. Again, you don't feel comfortable.
I'm always fine swapping out receivers.
Yes.
But I think DK Metcalf is super nice.
Catch your breath if you want, or go get some water if you really want to. But go get some water. But what I was getting at is Ayuk is going to be at 4:00, right? He's in that 4:00 window, and Rice is at that is in the night game. So that gives you the opportunity on FanDuel or DraftKings to make decisions later, right? Obviously, you have to decide what you're doing with the early options, but Ayuk being at that 4:00 window, one, it gives you a decision on FanDuel for that first time. Do I want to swap or not? And then DK, you get it as your last opportunity. And then on FanDuel, you can wait on the Rashee Rice stuff and look for other swap opportunities. So that's kind of the overall reasoning for it. But Bryce, you were saying?
Yeah, my voice should be good again. That was super weird. But I like Metcalf at 6.3. Him and Olave like kind of stand out to me in the mid-range here, more than like Neighbors and some of these other guys. Them and Godwin would be my preferred buys. If you do need to pay down, it's like Tank Dell. Demarcus Robinson, 5K is kind of like sticker shock. Like, oh, this guy shouldn't be above 5K, but you can easily see him be like Sean McVay's like alpha receiver in this offense. Yeah. I think if anyone takes it, he is. And I think he's a pretty good play on FanDuel as well. Issue is you don't really need the salary on FanDuel with Akers at 4K. So like, you don't really need to buy a cheap receiver. I would rather just pay up to the mid 6s, but in a vacuum, he's a really solid play.
All right, that's receiver. Let's move over to tight end. And I mean, everyone has deemed Brock Bowers as the best tight end in the league now. And listen, I get it. He's going to be the best tight end in the league. He's going to be the next Travis Kelce or Rob Gronkowski and might even be better than him. But do we play him at this price tag? He's 5,400 on DK. FanDuel, he is 6,300. He is likely going to be the most projected option, but we have a lot of salary to work with. Travis Kelce is someone that you can consider on FanDuel. Dallas Goedert's another option that you definitely can consider because, hey, that team is shorthanded. I do think Devonta Smith is the guy, but you can make a case that Dallas Goedert's usage should go up a bit. Trey McBride is in one of the better games on the slate. I know Sam Laporta could pop off here, but I don't love that line situation right now, and I'm probably going to stay away from that situation a lot of the time in cash games going forward. But for me, I definitely like Trey McBride a lot. I get exposure to that Cardinals-Lions game, which I definitely want to get exposure to. Him or Brock Bowers are probably my favorite options. It is a really good opportunity for Brock Bowers going up against Carolina. I'm sure they could force feed him if they want, but for me, those are my two favorite options at tight end. How about you?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to disagree with there. I mean, Bowers looks like an absolute stud, and I played him in college pretty much every week I could. Um, you didn't even have to play tight end there. So,
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know college football, tight ends are pretty much the nut low, and you know, guy's an absolute freak. I do like him. Uh, I would prefer McBride. Like if price didn't matter, I just think it's a better scoring environment. And as you said, like it's a super easy way to get exposure to that game when we really haven't talked about Arizona Detroit players a lot outside of Kyler, right? Um, you know, Detroit's offense is just kind of loaded and they spread the ball around. Like Amon-Ra, like Jameson Williams, Laporta's kind of fallen by the wayside this year with the emergence of Jameson. Like those guys are going to get their targets no matter what. So I think Laporta's kind of a tougher click outside the tournaments. Um, Jake Ferguson's super interesting to me. He's too cheap on both sides if he plays, and Dallas does need a win here. I will say Baltimore's middle of the field defense with Kyle Hamilton is like a super tough matchup in my opinion for tight ends, but he's cheap and he kind of fits the bill. If you need to punt tight end, I think it's a little ugly this week. What do you think about like an Eric Saubert? Like if you need to punt DraftKings and Kittle's out.
Yeah, I mean, my struggle is like, I just don't. I mean, tight end hasn't been good, but I don't know if you're just gonna need. You just have so much good value, I guess.
I think
It's
it's
a
a
good
little more
question.
needed on. I would not punt tight end on FanDuel. I think
Yeah.
FanDuel's like with 4K Cam Akers. I think it's super easy to pay for tight end. I think you should be paying for tight end on FanDuel, and to me, that's McBride or Bowers. Even if you wanted to punt tight end on FanDuel, I think Taysom Hill at 5K is pretty solid. But I think on DraftKings, the builds kind of bring it more into play at 2,500. You can do stuff with your team that you aren't able to do. Like you get 4.7 Cam Akers, but you still want to spend on some running backs. You want to spend on
Yeah.
IU, you want to spend on quarterback. Like DraftKings, you typically need two cheap players. So I was kind of leaning into like, oh, this guy makes things work that you can't do otherwise. Is he playable?
So last week I would have said no because you just had Colby Parkinson, who wasn't that much more. Like Parkinson now is at the price tag of three
He's
six, and
Yeah,
like
I would play like Munt personally over Parkinson
yeah.
for cheaper. I think it's more like, can you full punt Saubert? Um, it's super thin, but you still get a Kyle Shanahan tight end that's going to get schemed into like a couple passes. I think. I think it's a little thin. Granted, I don't think tight end's the strongest thing this week. Like I would rather get like 4.5 for Ferguson in a perfect world, or even 5.4 for Bowers. But
Yeah.
if you need to go cheap, I don't think it's the craziest thing of all time.
Well, if you do that and you have three Niners, right? You have Mason, Ayuk, and then the tight end.
Yeah, it's like the Rams situation last week, and they just fell absolutely flat on their face.
Yeah, and also understand like when you play that tight end, you're not doing it because you're playing Niners offense. You're doing it because you want to get in another player like a Justin Jefferson or some other big option that maybe you're not able to. So understand you're not really. I mean, it feels like you're playing three Niners, but that's not the point of the build. It's because of what it
Nope.
does for the full lineup.
No,
And
you want like 6 points from them.
yeah,
You don't need a ton.
yes, of course. So, but yeah, I mean, it's to like finalize your point. I think it is in play. I probably won't lean that way, but I think you have to at least look at it. So I'm sure when I run stuff, I'll give it a look and see if there's anything that makes sense. When you look at a team, maybe just let's say you have Bowers in there, take Bowers out, put the tight end in, and just play around with it and see what it gets you. But
Speaking of cheap San Francisco guys, I think Jawan Jennings is in play this week at 4.1 on DraftKings. I'd rather play Demarcus Robinson on FanDuel, but and I don't think you need multiple cheap guys, but I would much prefer Jennings to super cheap tight end personally.
yeah, I was going to mention too, like we obviously have those Rams receivers. You brought up Jennings. The one reason why we might not have to consider them as much is because We just have cheaper running backs. But of course, if you want to go that way, you certainly can. And you obviously consider Whittington too, if you want, over someone like Robinson. So a lot of different ways you can go this week. I do think more people will lean the cheaper running back route. We can talk about defense real quick, I guess. Obviously, we typically want to punt our defense, but for me, it's simply where am I landing? I'm never prioritizing a spend up defense. I'll say that. I think if I have the money, I mean, Bo Nix has been horrendous. The Buccaneers defense is definitely one that I would look at for sure as an interesting option in that mid-tier range. As we go down, like you could always make a case, like for instance, I considered the Cardinals defense last week. I didn't play the Cardinals defense, and I considered even taking them against the Rams, even if it was gross, but it was more for the punting option. And hey, they're just going to drop back a lot, and there's going to be opportunities there. So some of these cheap defenses, you're going to just consider because there are going to be opportunities in games. Like you could make a case for the Cardinals. You could make that case for the Rams defenses, full punts, just because there's going to be a lot of dropbacks, or even the Saints against Jalen Hurts, who hasn't looked good. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go. Do you have any defensive thoughts, Bryce?
Yeah. 1 second.
Yeah,
let me wrap this up real quick. Browns would be number 1 for me if price didn't matter. Bucks 2. After that, it's a little sticky. I don't mind the Titans. Don't hate the Bears. I think it's super easy to go cheap at defense this week. I could even see like a Dolphins. I think you could even punt like the Broncos. Like Baker will still take sacks and throw picks. I don't think you need to spend a defense this week, and it's not a priority for me. Definitely last one in.
Yeah, for sure. Don't got too much else to mention. Again, that'll wrap up the cash show. We got more news that'll come, so be sure to check that out. Get in the Discord chat over at Run Pure Sports, and that way you can kind of get all our thoughts. We'll have the content up over on the site as well. So that's gonna wrap it up though for me, Mangone and Bryce. We will see you guys later.